Imagine this. You're at work. You've come up with the next big idea. It's the kind of idea that will guarantee you a promotion. So you write it down, complete with your notes and a PowerPoint presentation. And just before your presentation, someone spills water on your laptop. I'm sure some of you have been there. Guess who's joined your club now? Xi Jinping, the president of China. He had a grand plan to broker peace in Ukraine, to be called the peacemaker. But one of his wolf warriors has poured water on it. We're talking about the man on your screen, Liu Shaye. He's China's ambassador in Paris, and he's in the headlines for an interview. An interview where he talked about former Soviet states. More than 30 years back, when the USSR broke up, 15 new countries were formed. Today, the world recognizes them as independent nations. But the Chinese ambassador said they're not independent. And this statement has triggered a storm. China has a diplomatic crisis on its hands. At least 4 European states have protested. Baltic states are furious. Chinese diplomats are scrubbing traces of that interview. And China's so-called Ukraine peace plan is in tatters. Tonight, we'll discuss all of it, starting with the interview. Ambassador Liu of China spoke to a French news network, and the Chinese side shared a full transcript of the interview, both in Mandarin and French. But if you look for it now, you won't find it. Because the Chinese embassy in France has taken it down. We looked for it too. No trace. But from other sources, we've managed to access some quotes. The interviewer asked Ambassador Liu about the war in Ukraine, also about the status of Crimea. Crimea is a peninsula that Russia took from Ukraine in the year 2014. So the Chinese ambassador was asked a very straight, basic question. Is Crimea a part of Ukraine? And here's how he responded. I'm quoting. It depends on how you perceive the problem. There is a history. Crimea was originally Russian. It was Khrushchev who offered Crimea to Ukraine during the period of the Soviet Union. That's how it began. And Ambassador Liu just made it worse as he completed the answer. Let me quote again. Even these ex-Soviet Union countries do not have effective status, as we say, under international law, because there is no international accord to concretize their status as a sovereign country. Let that sink in. And do remember, this is not a slip of tongue. Ambassador Liu very clearly said former Soviet states are not independent and that their sovereignty has not been recognized under international law. This is a top Chinese diplomat questioning the sovereignty of 15 countries. No wonder China is facing a severe backlash from Europe. The strongest reactions have come from the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. All 3 were part of the Soviet Union, and all 3 have summoned the top Chinese diplomat in their country. Latvia has called the comments, quote unquote, completely unacceptable. Estonia said China's position, and I'm quoting again, is incomprehensible. And Lithuania went a step ahead. Its foreign minister said they don't trust China, especially when it comes to brokering peace in Ukraine. And backing them is the EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell. He called the Chinese statement, and I'm quoting, unacceptable. Even Ukraine has weighed in. Remember, President Zelensky wanted to speak to Xi Jinping. He wanted to discuss the Chinese peace plan. He even invited the Chinese president to visit Kiev. But all of that may change now. Here's what Ukraine's ambassador to France has said. Text question, who owns Crimea, is revealing as usual. Next time, it will be good to expand who owns Vladivostok. Such comments are still coming in.
It is totally unacceptable. We are denouncing such a statement, and I hope that the bosses of this ambassador will make things straight.
Well, first of all, it's completely unacceptable. Later today, 3 Baltic states will be summoning representatives, in our case the Charge d'Affaires, in other capitals is the ambassador, to ask for clarification. Has Chinese position changed on the independence? And to remind him that we're not post-Soviet countries, we're the countries that were illegally occupied by the Soviet Union.
China needs to tell us that the position of the ambassador in Paris is not the official position of China.
China is in damage control mode, and their biggest worry is France. The French president, remember, went out on a limb to back Beijing. He went to China earlier this month. He tried to get China to broker peace in Ukraine. And for doing this, he got a lot of brickbats from Europe. But after a statement like this one, Will Macron still be able to bat for China? Will he be in a position to bat for China? Paris has said it was dismayed by Ambassador Liu's comments. Listen to this. We learned with dismay of the remarks of the Chinese ambassador to France concerning the borders of the countries which became independent with the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. It is up to China to say whether these remarks reflect its position, which we hope not. China took the cue. It tried to distance itself from the comments of its ambassador.
After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, China was one of the first countries to establish diplomatic ties with relevant countries. Since the establishment of diplomatic ties, China has always adhered to the principles of mutual respect and equal treatment to develop bilateral, friendly and cooperative relations. The Chinese side respects the status of the member states as sovereign states after the dissolution of the Soviet Union.
But it's a very poor face saver, because look at the man whose words China is trying to disown. He's a repeat offender, yet a top diplomat. Ambassador Liu belongs to a special category of Chinese diplomats called wolf warriors. They specialize in an aggressive and combative style of diplomacy, and Liu has a long history of doing this. Last year, he gave another controversial interview. It was when US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. Ambassador Liu called for the re-education of Taiwan. And in China, re-education is code for persecution. It's what the state does in Xinjiang. They've locked up more than 1 million Uyghurs in the name of re-education, and these people are now being forced to pledge loyalty to the Communist Party. Ambassador Liu suggested the same for Taiwan. Then at the height of the pandemic, Liu's embassy published a blog. It was about the Western response to the pandemic. The blog said the West handled the virus recklessly. It talked about France too, the country where he's stationed. And it said that health workers left the elderly in nursing homes to die. What a claim to make. So Ambassador Liu tends to wade into controversy. But this is not the problem of an individual. It's about the system that he represents. That's what's problematic. China practices what he's saying. It tries to push a flawed interpretation of history, a version that suits Beijing, that benefits the Communist Party. China tries to impose its worldview, and its ambassador is only taking that forward. In 2021, Xi Jinping delivered a speech. He said, "No history, love the party." That's exactly what his foot soldiers are doing now. Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony.